who is Greg Clayton, and how did you get interested in iOS?
Well, so who is Craig Clayton? I'm a self-taught iOS developer. So I've been doing it since 2010. I work currently for a company building sports apps for the major teams in the NFL, NBA, NHL, MLS, as well as stadium apps. I've been with this company over 7, 8 years now. I don't even remember. Been there with a while. Um, and like I said, I got started in 2010.
Nice. And what got your interest in 2010?
Actually, it was the iPad keynote that hooked me in. Was never really interested in developing for the iPhone. And I always joke it's the only device I really don't get to code for now is the iPad. But the iPad came out, I had tons of ideas and wanted to work with it. And literally as soon as the webinar, or sorry, the keynote was over, I jumped in, signed up, and started learning Objective C.
Oh, interesting. And so the iPad, like I believe it was Steve Jobs who introduced the
Yes,
first iPad.
he did.
And did they introduce the second one version or no?
They did down the road, but that was the iPad was the first gen, and it was literally the reason why I got into iOS.
Nice. And were you into like tablets ahead of that or?
No, I just, the iPhone back then was really small, so really wasn't like when you're a big guy with big hands, like those little phones really didn't do much for me. And so the iPad really was the game changer for me because it was more of something that was realistically sized for me, I would say.
Yeah,
So yeah, I still like developing for the iPad. I just don't get a chance to do it as much.
right. Gotcha. Nice. Objective C. And I personally started with Swift.
Hmm.
So I can't even imagine how like the learning process was, like in terms of getting resources and documentation and Stack
It,
Overflow.
there wasn't really a ton of really videos online that came later. I struggled through Stanford videos. The worst part of them was you would watch like 2 hours and then they would just cut it off, and then
Oh,
you'd be like, okay, what about the rest of it?
right.
So it was really hard. And if you don't really know anyone, like in my case, who does iOS, you don't have anyone to really ask. So I struggled a lot, but I got through it, which is part of the reason why I do a lot of helping beginners now, is because of that. Just I remember that struggle, and especially when you're by yourself, it's a lot easier now. There's tons of resources online, but for me, there wasn't. So it was definitely a crawl to get into iOS.
Gotcha. And I'm sure like you probably built a couple of personal projects to.
Yes, I built two. I built two sports apps, a Lakers app and a Raiders app. I was just into sports. And
Nice.
then I did
Much
a
fun.
presentation at a meetup group and met my coworker who I work with now. He saw my stuff and told our boss, and eventually through some other channels, I eventually started working for them maybe like 6 to 8 months later.
Nice. The Lakers app. I'm into basketball,
Yes,
so I like that.
yes,
Well, what did
I'm
I?
a huge basketball fan.
Nice, nice. Yeah, that
Yes,
was right after Kobe actually won the championship, 2010 Lakers.
yes,
Yeah, yeah.
yes. Yeah, I've been a Laker fan since I don't even remember. I lived in LA and then I moved to Florida, and Kobe came into the league as I graduated high school. So I literally he was only a year younger than me. So I literally saw him from when, before he was a Laker, like when it was just a rumor, to him retiring. So my whole adult life, I've pretty much seen a little bit of Magic, but basically all of Kobe.
Right. Oh wow.
Yeah.
So nice. So definitely you prefer Kobe over LeBron James?
I don't see. So
Okay.
I'm not like that.
Okay.
I to me, if they're in the Lakers uniform, I'm cool. Like
Okay.
I'm not like most people who like think that there's this competition. I never, I didn't really like LeBron when he first came into the league. And then when everyone kind of started jumping on him after the decision is when I was okay with him. I didn't really like the Heat. And then when he went back to Cleveland, I was cool. But it he gets a lot of hate for no reason.
Right.
So
Yeah, I really like that he cares about his teammates a lot. Like he tries to assist as much as possible.
yeah,
But
I'm sorry. To me, he's like what Michael Jordan should be. Like Michael Jordan on the court is hands down, but off the court he didn't really speak.
yeah,
And LeBron speaks up for the players. So same with Kobe.
right,
And so to me, I feel like LeBron is he's loved by even even the players that don't play with him because
mm,
he's always going to bat for them and making sure that they get their money and on their side. And I think Michael was a lot of about him and not really caring about anybody else in the league other than him.
right. Well, at the end of the day, they're all great players. So
Yes, definitely.
they're
Yeah.
great players. And yeah, tell me a little bit more about your app, the Lakers app.
Oh, so that app was just a basic news app. I
Okay.
learned how to do Ruby.
Mhm.
It was driven by that, and it wasn't anything special, but it was
Okay.
for the skill set I had. I had to learn Ruby and then Rails, and then I built an API for it, and I did all of this stuff for it. So I did a lot to get it to where it was, but um, I did the design, I did everything. So I
Right.
learned a lot, and now in my business, that now the company I work for, it's basically the same stuff
Mhm.
I'm doing now. So
Nice. And yeah, so what about, I read that you're writing a Swift UI book.
I am. I'm in the middle of writing that book now. It was supposed to be out now, and then I decided to, because of being it so close to June, it didn't make sense to release it
Mm,
like a month before Swift UI 2 or whatever they call it.
right.
So I decided to talk to the publisher, and we're literally going to publish as soon as the iOS 14 release. So
Okay.
the majority of the book is written, um, and I have maybe two more apps to do and four more chapters to write. And then I'll convert it over to the latest Swift UI and integrate whatever new stuff Apple introduces. So it'll be a combination of everything from last year to everything new,
Yeah.
and you get six apps: two watch apps, two
Mhm.
iPhone apps, and two
Yeah.
iPad apps we build.
iPad. Okay. And I believe those iPad apps can work on the Mac, on the MacBook.
They can. I haven't act. Those are the two chapters that I'm work the four chapters I'm working on now. So I'm still kind of researching. I'm trying to do some advanced core data stuff in one of the chapters in one of the apps, and then the other app is actually a sports app for the iPad, and I want to do some cool stuff there too. So I kind of just go with what I try to get as much as I can in the app.
Right.
So each chapter, each app is two chapters, except for some of the beginning ones, and so you get a whole chapter with design and then the whole chapter with data. So you're able to kind of, if you're somebody who doesn't really care about design, you can just jump to the chapter and
Right.
start on the data side of it. And I try to cover combine and core data and all of the different technologies that someone would want to learn. But you can also find, how do I overlay stuff. How do I create a cell? Why is my cell not tappable for the
Mhm.
whole thing? So it really does cover a ton, and it's definitely design heavy. So if you're into design, you should enjoy it.
And so, what do you think of your adoption of Swift UI over UI kit going forward?
Um, I would say I kind of tried to approach it as new. I didn't really try to compare the two because UI Kit's been around forever and this
Mhm.
is new. So for me, it was like trying to make what can I do to make use of what's good about Swift UI, and so that was kind of the hurdle for me, seeing a design and knowing I didn't really have to use third party stuff. Animations are definitely not like UI kit. They're so much easier to do, and so I found myself in really enjoying it. And I know there's a lot of things that are missing and things that could be better, but for me, and being like somewhat of a designer as a like a hobby, I enjoyed it. It was fun because I didn't have to worry so much about third party stuff. I could really just do it and make it work and try to use my brain to figure out how I would manipulate the code to get it to work the way I'm looking to do, even if it's not the way Apple, invented it for. But
Mhm.
I enjoy it. I think obviously it needs grid and it needs some of the things that everyone kind of talks about, but
Mhm.
and it needs more customization for like list instead of using the having to go into table view to do it. But I think that it's for a first release, it's pretty good, and I think it'll just get better and it'll
Right.
be common.
And it's also like a different way of thinking, like since it's now declarative as opposed to
Yes.
imperative.
Yeah, and even design wise, there's a lot of differences. What I do is I try to start from a small piece of it. So if it's a cell, I try to make my cell that size, but it can expand in width. I found that when you just try to do what Apple suggests, which is you write all your code on the main timeline and then you refactor into views, I found that that's a lot harder because of the way things float and the way that things are. So for me, I see if I have something that's going to repeat, then I just create that as a cell and then I work my way backwards. So
Right.
then I take all the views and I just start adding them to the parent view, and then that's how I create my all my designs. And it to me that has been the most effective way to work, and it's kind of the way I guide in the book as well, because just trying to when you try to like refactor and you're cutting and pasting, you're missing curly braces, and it's
Right.
not it's not an efficient way to design. So to me that's the best way.
Nice. Have you worked with like the compositional layout?
I have. So I
Okay.
wrote a chapter for Paul Hudson did a book for Black Girls Code. All the proceeds went to that, and I wrote a chapter on it. And I think if Swift UI hadn't come out when it did, that would have been the topic everyone would have been talking about. Swift UI compositional layout is really powerful, and I'm actually in the next couple of weeks going to be using it in some of my production code for things. So I'm really excited to use it at least until I get to Swift UI.
Hmm. Yeah, it's kind of interesting how it's not as popular as it should be, I think, compared
Yeah.
to. Yeah, and yeah, the reason why I brought it up is like you start with items in it, and then you have your section, and then the group. I think
Yes.
that's laid
And
out.
then item. Yeah, I mean it's fairly straightforward. I mean, when you start getting into nested groups, it gets a little confusing, but
Mhm.
overall I found it to be useful, and much easier to use. It should have been the way collection view was to begin with, because collection view in my first 3 books I wrote, collection view is the view that I always tell people is more important than table view, because
Mhm.
you can do really anything with collection view, and table view is really stricted to lists, but I can do lists in collection view, and then I can make it work with the iPad, so then it goes to grid. And it just, to me, collection view is powerful. I feel like beginners don't get taught enough. Everyone sticks to going to table view, and I feel like if you taught them collection view first, table view would be like, oh, well, that's really easy, but I'd rather use collection view.
Gotcha.
So,
When you're going to work on a new iOS app,
mhm.
how do you tell me about the process from like beginning and then to development and then into production? How do you
Okay.
make sure it's effective?
So it I guess it depends. If I'm hands on from beginning to end, and I'm doing the wireframes, then the design, and then the code,
Yeah.
I try to structure or just keep things small as possible, and look at any pain points that may be a problem for me as far as my skill set. So there's things that I haven't dug deep into, and there's tons of stuff in iOS. So when there's something that's maybe a little bit something I haven't done a lot of, then
Yeah.
what I'll do is, ahead of time I'll work in a small project and just learn it and just kind of get an idea of what it, how it is, and what I could possibly run into while I'm working on it.
Yeah.
But for the most part, I think, um, being involved in the wireframe and the design and then doing the code as well has been helpful for me because I understand both sides of the spectrum of what the designers are looking for and then what the developers want. And so I would never do something that I don't think would work. And then sometimes I'm like, I'll do something only to push myself to do something different. And that's another positive of being able to do your own design is you know what your limits are, but you also know your limits and how you can push yourself even more to do things that you may not do if somebody else did the design.
Gotcha. And then definitely it would be a different story if you're like joining the project that's already been started.
Hmm.
So how do
True.
you, yeah, so how do you convince your opinion on how to work on something?
I think it's just communicating. I've been working with the
Yeah.
same guy for the last 8 years together. So
Yeah.
we work really well, because he's very, back endy, and he likes dealing with data models and the API structure, and I'm very visual, and so we kind of stay in our own lanes until I or he has to switch. I do
Gotcha.
like doing the data side, and I have my own opinions on structure, but,
Mhm.
um, as far as design goes, like we use storyboards. I got him on board with that,
Mhm.
and color assets, and so I feel like we work really well together simply because, he's good at the data, points and the aspects, and then also just like really weird bugs.
Mhm.
He's able to do, and then for me, just the visual. So I can
Nice.
take a design and make it look, take a look at a design and make it exactly the way it needs to be, with the exception of pixel pushing by our designers. But I get pretty close.
Nice. Awesome. And tell me about, yeah, like you mentioned that you try to help, you reach out to help iOS developers when
Hmm.
they're starting to learn how to code, like you're writing a book, and
Yes.
also you worked with Black Girls Code as well. And
Yes.
yeah, could you tell me a little bit more about that?
So, it's I've been trying to literally my brother was here last this past week, and I'm getting him into Swift, and, just helping people realize that it's not as difficult as it seems. I mean, there are parts that are hard, like
Yeah.
it's not easy, but like my brother didn't think he could do it, and he was teaching some math and graphing, and I'm like, you know stuff that I couldn't even wrap my head around. So you really should look at code. And when he started to see it, and then he was already like within like a day wanting to build an app. So I think just seeing someone go from, I can't to I can to, having a full-time job as a dev,
Mhm.
it's awesome. I've numerous people have reached out and said that, I helped them a lot with my book and getting them to where they are, and just
Right.
being there, like not a lot of people who write books are always willing to help. And I always tell people, they find me on Twitter, you can DM me, ask me questions,
Mhm.
and I'll answer it, if I know the answer, or I'll find the answer, and we'll work through it. But I enjoy it. And now I think Swift UI is getting to the point where devs that are experienced are now asking the same questions of, like little things that were really simple in UI kit, but now they're different in Swift
Right.
UI. And so it's cool.
Yeah. And also like with have you played with the Swift Playgrounds on the iPad?
That's what I started my brother on. And
Oh,
then,
right.
so he started that first, and then he was like hooked after about 15 minutes. And then
Right.
I told him to look at Paul Hudson's videos
Right.
and go through those. And then he like blazed through those in literally like
I think he has like
2 days.
Paul Hudson has 100 days of Swift.
He does. I told him to watch just he has this thing where he goes through each of the topics. It's like 20 videos,
Hmm.
and he talks about collection views to if statements to optionals. And
Right.
so I told him to watch that. And then when he was done, I'm like, okay, now jump into my book, and then let's start building an app. And then there it starts with storyboarding, and it doesn't really cover a lot of code, so it's a good transition.
Right.
And then it'll get him to the point where he'll start to understand. And he says he's starting to get it. And within, I suspect within a few months he'll be, you know deep into it.
Right. Yeah, I feel like a lot more people would be into coding if they knew like the right steps to take. And I feel like some people started like, oh, let me build an app. But you just need to start like with small steps. Start with like the playgrounds, and then maybe Paul Hudson's videos, and maybe have a mentor, and then you'll be able to hit the road in like a year or two
I
years.
agree. I think so what I told my brother, and my neighbor as well is doing it. What I tell them is, get learn the basics of Swift, understand those, and then have an app idea. So my brother already has an app idea, and then I'm like, once you are through the book, and I'm like, the book will basically get you to tell you how to do everything. You just won't know it yet. And then when you're through the book to where you built that first app,
Mhm.
then we'll go back to your app and we'll go, okay, here it is. Let's break it into small things. And like, this is the next topic you need to learn. This is the topic you already know. So now we can apply that to your design, and
Mhm.
then create like small projects. So that way they get repetitiveness of creating projects.
Right.
And then by the time they get to building their own app, it's not as daunting, because I think when you're a beginner, you try to think huge, and
Yeah.
you don't realize that it's just really, okay, it's a simple list. Okay, yeah, it may have a lot of stuff, but it's just a simple list.
Right.
And then once you start breaking those things down into little tasks,
Mhm.
it's not as daunting. And I think that's the way that I've always helped people, and I
Right.
find that it works.
Yeah, that's definitely the best practice, building small projects as you go on, as opposed to like watching tutorials over and over and
Exactly.
over. Yeah.
Tutorials are good,
Right.
but I
Right.
so what I told him was, is you we when you have your project,
Mhm.
you go and watch a tutorial that's helping you with a situation you're currently in. So
Right.
then you take whatever that tutorial is, and it will help you with moving you forward. But if you just keep watching like how to build this and how to build that, then you really don't put anything into practice, and then
Mhm.
you expect everyone to give you the code or tell you how to do it. And you got to
Right.
think for yourself, and eventually you'll start to see that
Mhm.
it's clicking, and you're able to go, okay, I can do this in collection view, and I can build it in this way because I learned it this way, and let's change this and see what happens. And as you start experimenting, you learn and you mess up. And like,
right.
even in my book, I mess up in my book. And I say that you're going to get bugs. You're going to get bugs. You're going to write bugs. Apple
Mhm.
writes bugs. So you might as well get used to them and comfortable, because it
Right.
just helps you. I remember spending like hours on like the stupidest bug, but you know what? I never forgot it. And so that just teaches you. And
Right.
it's just the way it is, you know?
Yeah, as they say, failure is the best teacher.
It is. And the worst is when you realize it was just like some little mistake, you know,
Right.
it was something stupid, and you're just like, how did I spend all that time? But you know, no,
Right.
when you get hired, no one's gonna know you spent 18 hours on a bug that was just a simple, like, you know, you misspelled a word, or you did something, you know, silly. But you
Right.
just that's the growing pains of being a developer. And I think a lot of us forget that when we become programmers, we forget where we started from and how difficult iOS really is when you first come in. And
Gotcha.
so, yeah.
And how is it? So let's get into like the interview process.
Hmm.
How important is like the data structures and algorithms?
So this is one of my pain points. So I'm a self-taught engineer, and those are things that I learn as I need them. So data structure and design patterns are things that I've learned as I've grown, and algorithms I'm starting to get more into. And I'm not a pro by any means. It is something on my list
Right.
to learn and get better at. But it's important. And I think when I first got into it, I just thought it was something that is a way to like weed people out, which it kind of is. But it also is good to know how things work on the lower end, on the back end of your code, and how to write efficient code and use
Mhm.
the correct data structure, data type when you're working on something. So
Right.
it does help you. But I don't. The problem is you don't really use them a ton in your everyday code, and
Right.
so it's really hard, especially for me. It's really hard to understand or get the gist of things, because again, I'm self-taught, and I didn't go to school. I didn't have an instructor teaching me data structures or other students with me. It's
Mhm.
just me. And
Right.
so I think that's probably been the big struggle.
Mhm.
Now in my current job, we were told to start doing testing. So now that's the part it's not hard. It's
Yeah.
just like figuring it out, like what I want to do, how I want to test, what will make it easier for me. And that process is kind of a little, it's fun. I absolutely enjoy doing TDD. And I find myself learning and pushing myself, and on the weekends, that's
Mhm.
usually what I use it for, is to learn things I don't know. So
Right.
testing right now is pretty much my weekend job, along with Swift UI.
Oh, nice. And definitely you get to learn how to like break up your code, make it very modular and testable. It's pretty.
Yes, and learning mocks and learning about protocols and being able to
Mhm.
move your stuff into protocols, that's things that I never did a ton of. And now with
Okay.
testing, it's like, okay, now I see why you do that. And so it's like, okay, it makes it easier. I can use a protocol and then be able to create methods that do what I want it to do. And
Mhm.
and like you do testing in your head, but
Right.
I feel like when you do tests, you're showing everyone else that you did test it. And I think that's the
Mhm.
key to doing it. But iOS community is very, and like Ruby, you go, when I did Ruby, people are like, oh, you should test. But I'm like, I'm just trying to learn. Like, I'm not
Right.
trying to add on to what I'm doing right now. So,
Mhm.
but I absolutely love it.
Nice. And yeah, oh, I just wanted you to explain a little more about Black Girls Code. So what
Oh,
is it
sorry.
and what do they do?
Yeah.
Sure.
So, actually met the owner in through my aunt. So she lives in Oakland, and we talked a couple times. And I don't even think she realizes I wrote in that book for her. But Black Girls Code basically is an organization that works with the different communities and teaching young women how to code, and they also teach boys, I'm pretty sure. But it's really good for women in general to learn because the industry lacks, especially in diversity of color. There's not a lot of African American men in iOS, but there's definitely not a lot of African American women. And there's a few that wrote in the book. Kamala and Kayla, I believe. Kaya, I'm so not remembering her name right now, but the two of them I've spoken with before, and they're both excellent developers, and it's good to just see people like me out there because it's not something that I really get to do. I really wish I could help more in the community and helping brown and black kids learn because I didn't have my first computer until I was mid 20s. So for me, it's like, you're at a real disadvantage if you're getting your first computer in your mid 20s. And so for me, I wish I had started when I was 15 or 16 because I probably would be way past where I am now.
Right. Yes, and it definitely helps to see somebody that looks like you in the field. It just definitely motivates it, motivates you to say that, oh, I can do it too.
Exactly. And it is really about that. I mean,
Right.
there's really no one on the stage of Apple other than a few that I know. And it's great to see them on stage because it's just, goals. Like, it would one day, I don't think I'll ever be on Apple stage, but if I am, then I know that I can inspire another kid who's lives in Chicago or in New York or in Florida who loves coding and wants to work for Apple, but never sees anyone like him. And now he can see me on the stage or see anyone on the stage. So it's great to just be able to motivate and inspire others to do what you're doing.
Yes. Yeah, great work. And
Thanks.
yeah, so let's go to the next section.
Okay.
GCD.
So now with Swift UI and Combine, I've been using Combine a lot. I never really dove much into RX Swift or Reactive a lot.
Okay.
But I really do enjoy Combine
Yes.
and currently it's I see why people use it. I don't think it should be used at like for everything like a lot of people do use it for, but I see the need for it.
I see. Okay. But before Combine, you'd use a GCD.
We used reactive in the back end. That a lot of that was done by my partner. So a lot of the things data wise he did, and then I did visual. And if I needed to, I'd jump in and code. But it's something I'm now comfortable with. I would say 5-6 years ago or more,
Yes.
I wasn't. But yeah.
Yes. Gotcha. And next question. How is memory managed in Swift?
That's a good question. I'm a design nerd, so you ask me about storyboards, I can help you. But memory management in Swift is handled by them. I know that it's in Objective C. You had to handle it yourself, and that
Right.
was overly painful.
Yeah.
But I do know that Apple does manage it for you.
Yes. With I think it's called um, ARC, automatic reference counting.
Correct.
Yeah. All right. And explain the difference between a send delegate and app delegate.
That is a good question. That came out of nowhere, and um, I never really honestly looked up why they added scene delegate versus app delegate.
Yeah.
It's I that's a good question.
Yeah.
Um,
It's
is
with
it
like
being used? Is it being used in Swift as well as Swift UI? Because I don't.
it's with like the multitask on the iPad.
Oh, see,
Yeah.
I don't really do much on the iPad, so.
Oh,
Huh.
yeah. Like you can see how you could have like different just two apps in one window on the iPad.
Got it.
So those are like two different scenes.
Okay,
Right.
that makes sense.
Yeah,
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 I haven't done a ton of it. I
okay.
have seen Scene Delegate in Swift UI apps,
Right.
but I just thought it was more related to Swift UI than it was. I didn't realize it was specific for iPad, but
Yeah.
that's interesting.
Yep, yep. And let's go to the next question. What are the advantages of creating other layouts in code versus storyboard?
Oh, well, see, I'm the opposite. I find
Okay.
storyboard is easier
Yes.
to do auto layout.
Okay.
I am all about separation of concern, and I
Okay.
don't feel like I should flood my code with
Okay.
design stuff when I can do it in storyboard. So I do everything there, and it's easier for me to visualize than it is to write a bunch of numbers and say left, right, up, down. To me,
Yeah.
I find it easier to work with storyboard and I mean with auto layout and storyboard.
Okay. Nice.
Yeah. I'm one of the few, but um I to me auto layout isn't that bad and it's and literally you give me a design and I can
Yes.
have it done in 2 minutes with auto layout and
Right.
storyboard.
Right. Yes. Yeah. As long as you get the hang of it, you can do it really fast. As opposed to in code, you just have to write down every single thing.
And the negative with that is somebody else who comes in, if they're not real familiar with it, then they have to differentiate between your auto layout code and the actual code you're supposed to be writing. And so to me,
Mhm.
everything you can put in a storyboard or a nib makes life easier because then your code is actual production code that you're actually using and not like a layout.
Okay. Nice. And so no advantage to you? No.
No, I to me it's a disadvantage. If
Okay.
I'm told I have to code auto layout,
Yes.
I would be crying because it literally would
Okay.
be painful.
Gotcha. How could you set up live rendering?
Live rendering. I'm not sure if that's the name, but when you run the simulator, you there's a button that you can hit where it shows you all of the 3D
Mhm.
imaging of like where your views are. If that's what
Oh,
live
yes.
rendering.
In like the debugger? Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. I believe it's like with like IB designable.
Mm-hmm.
Like once you're writing, well, so when you're writing your attributes or you're writing your UI working code, and you put up at IB designable.
Mm-hmm.
Um, in that once you change like let me say the color from blue to red, in the interface it's gonna change right away as opposed to like running it.
Rewriting the code. Yep. I've been
Okay.
using oh man, what is the name of the company? There's a third party app that does a Mac app of it. And I've been using it in particular with accessibility, but also with doing stuff with design. And the
Mm,
name is like not there right now. But it does a similar thing to the one that Apple does, but it's actually a little bit more, it gives you a lot more information.
gotcha. Nice. Yeah, send it to me once you get to
I
know.
will. I'll find it. I'm
Yes.
actually googling it right now to try to tell
Yeah,
you before we
yeah,
stop.
gotcha. Awesome. So let me get to the next question. Is what is an optional and a nil?
I will say this: when I first started learning Swift, I hated
Yeah.
optionals, and now I actually love them. So optionals,
Yes.
basically, the way I explain it to beginners is
Yes.
it's like a little box that helps protect you from messing up, and
Yes.
you can put things inside of it, and
Mhm.
if there's nothing there,
Yeah.
then nothing happens, and your app doesn't crash. And if you decide to be smart and use an exclamation point and unwrap that little box and there is nothing there, then
Yeah.
your app will go kaboom and blow up. So
Right.
basically, an optional is a way to protect your code and write code
Right.
with the within, I guess, knowing that if something doesn't come back from a server the way it's supposed to, you expected a string, it comes back an int. The data's not there, but you expect it to be there. This is a way to really protect you from having tons of crashes in your app.
Right. And a
And
good way
nil
to,
is,
yeah.
I'm sorry, go ahead.
Oh, and a good way to check for it is with like guard statements.
Using guards or iflets. Guards pretty much is shorter in code, so I would use that. But yeah, guards or iflets.
Yes. Oh, and you're gonna explain nil?
Nil is just basically nothing's there, and that allows you to, run your code without, again, having any issues.
That's right. Yep.
Table views are horrible. Stay away from them. No. So collection views basically allow you to are more powerful, and still, in my opinion, you can do grids, you can do lists. They give you the flexibility of creating a layout for both iPhone and iPad if you have to design for both and have a different look. Table views are great for doing list stuff. Settings are pretty much where I would stick to keeping them is using it for settings and other simple tasks. But for the most part, I collection views are the bee's knees over table views because of their flexibility, and they really, you can create anything your mind can come up with, and even with the new oh man, the new layout stuff is also making it even more powerful. I don't see many reasons to use table views.
Yep. I agree with you. Unless, yeah, I always use collection views as well. This is so flexible and dynamic.
Exactly.
All right.
Again, more back-endy stuff, but synchronous and asynchronous. Asynchronous task would be, if I'm not mistaken, waiting on something to respond, like a web call. You are basically asynchronous, where you're waiting for a response to come back and then something goes. And then synchronous, I would assume the definition would be the opposite of that. Again, me and being self-taught, some of these terms for me, I don't always know the exact term, but I use them all the time. I just don't really know it.
Right. Yeah, so asynchronous is like when you have like several operations happening in the background threads. Yeah. And synchronous is one after the other.
Oh, there you go.
Yeah. And what is a UI stack view, and when do you use it?
Never.
Never. What?
Honestly, I am not a fan of UI stack views.
Okay.
They're okay.
Yes.
But if you need to do some kind of stacking repeatedly, they're okay. But honestly, you can do that in regular, like I could do exactly what stack view does with auto layout and UI views. So it's a good little feature for people who aren't savvy with design, but to me, I don't think I think maybe once or twice and maybe one or two apps total I've used it, and I really didn't need to. It was more just it's here, it's new, let me try it.
Yeah, so that means you must be really savvy with all the layouts, for sure.
I'm super comfortable with auto layout.
Yeah. Awesome. And yeah, the UI stack view makes it convenient in a way.
Yes.
Yeah. So what is the difference between file private and private?
So file private means it cannot be, it's private to the file, and private means outside of the file you cannot access.
That's right.
You can't access the property or variable or function.
And then there's also internal as well.
Yes. I don't use internal too much. So what I found the easiest way to make it work is create an extension, make the extension private, and then every method within the extension just doesn't have a declaration in front of it. And then that way I can separate my code in methods that I don't want to be seen outside of the methods I don't want to be seen outside of the class. And then I also use an extension to clean up my code. So the main class wrapper is for Apple's like init methods, all of their default ones, depending on what you're using. And then I created an extension that basically is like just an extension where it lets me do my initialize functions, my create data functions, all of that, and I make that private. And then I make more extensions for if I have collection view or table view instantiations that I need. So that way it separates my code into smaller, easier to read
Gotcha. Nice.
sections.
So what design pattern do you use? Do you use MVC or MVVM?
So honestly, my favorite design pattern is Viper. I absolutely love Viper.
Nice.
But I usually go with what I how do I explain? I go with what the project needs more than what I would prefer. If I know it's a bigger project and I want it and it's modular based, then I'll stick with Viper. If it's a simple app and it needs just limited stuff, I'll go to MVVM. I don't typically, even in my book, really do MVC because that's just massive view controllers. And so I try to at least separate the data in a way that's even logical. It was really painful to write a beginner book in knowing that you didn't really agree with MVC. So I tried to explain that, we keep our data. I keep the data in a manager. It's separate, so you're not putting data and that kind of stuff in your controllers. So I try to stick to the pattern that the app presents. But if I had to pick the design pattern I love the most, the pattern I love the most would be Viper.
And it's a lot more testable that way.
Exactly.
Nice. All right. Yeah.
That's good. I don't know I failed all of the lower level stuff, but hey.
You definitely did a good job, I'll say.
Thanks.
Yep. All right. So to top it up, like, what kind of advice would you have from somebody who's studying, hey, from day zero today, like, yeah, I want to build an iOS app?
I would say the process would be open up the iPad app, open up Swift Playgrounds. It actually is on the Mac now too. Yes. Learn and play around with that and see if it catches your eye. And if it does, then hit up one of the many YouTube channels that have Swift in general, Swift 101, and learn that, get comfortable, and then find a tutorial that you like that will build one app, and then go from there. Then get an app that you want to build and then start breaking it down into smaller chunks of apps that you can learn and build upon, because if you can be doing tutorials for years and years, but if you really just focus on those things, within 4 to 6 months, you'll be deep in your app and dealing with the everyday code of like bugs and just learning how to use Google and Stack Overflow to figure out problems instead of having to go through another tutorial and then it doesn't actually help you.
Awesome. And where do you see yourself in 5 years?
Good question. I don't know. It would probably be, of course, still doing development. I'd like to help more minorities get into dev, and even just anyone in general that wants to learn. I'm hoping that my algorithm skills get better, and some of the lower level programming behind iOS, just knowledge base getting better. I think the more that I do things and I get curious, it helps. But right now, I think my focus is just getting a beautiful app and getting it done, even if I don't fully, know every single thing I'm doing, and then, start to, put things together, put the pieces together as I get better.
Awesome. And yeah, Greg, it's been a great talk today.
Thank you,
And
man. Same to you.
yeah, for sure. And where can the people find you? Which
Pretty much the two places I frequent the most are Instagram and Twitter, and they're both the same name, which is the Dev Me. And if you follow me, hit me up, say hello. And if you have questions, just send me a DM or send me just a tweet, and I'll hear it or see it. Sometimes I miss them. My phone doesn't always notify me, and I'll be more than happy to help, especially with now that Swift UI is getting bigger and bigger. I've got a course coming in the fall for some stuff that I'm working on with Swift UI that I think will be pretty cool.
Nice. Can't wait to check it out. And
Yeah.
yeah, all the best to you. And
Thank you, man. Thanks for having me. I appreciate you inviting me.
yeah, for sure. And we're definitely going to talk again in the future, for sure.
Sounds good. Just make sure you give me the questions ahead of time next time.
They're going to be a little harder next time.
Oh, great. That's
Yeah.
fine. Maybe in like 5 years from now.
Okay.
Sounds good.
All right, take care, man.
Thanks, man. You too.